You've been lied to. Not maliciously, perhaps, but profoundly. The bedrock wisdom passed down through generations, save for a rainy day, a penny saved is a penny earned, is about to become a cruel joke. And it's not a conspiracy theory, it's just math. Inevitable, cold, hard math. By 2026, the quiet erosion will accelerate into a full-blown avalanche, and your meticulously built nest egg, your diligently saved pennies, could quite simply disappear. Not stolen, not hacked, just gone. Rendered worthless by forces few understand but everyone will feel. This isn't about the inflation you see at the gas pump or the grocery store, though those are certainly symptoms. No, this is about something far more fundamental: the systemic, often deliberate destruction of purchasing power. It's a historical pattern repeating itself with terrifying precision, right now, in your pocket, in your bank account, in your retirement fund. We're not talking about minor fluctuations. We're talking about a slow-motion financial earthquake that has already begun and whose epicenter is rapidly approaching 2026. Think your savings are safe? Think again. The very institutions designed to protect your wealth are inadvertently, or perhaps inevitably, eroding it. The game is rigged, not by nefarious villains in smoky back rooms, but by the relentless, compounding pressures of debt, demographics, and political expediency. It's a tragic, inescapable story written across millennia, and you, my friend, are about to enter its most dangerous chapter. To understand how your future is being stolen, silently, incrementally, by the very system promising stability, we need to rewind. Not just a few decades, but 2 millennia. To an empire that thought itself eternal, and a currency that seemed immutable. To Rome. Imagine, if you will, the bustling forum in the early days of the Roman Empire, around the time of Augustus. Coins clinked in sacks, their weight reassuringly heavy, their silver gleaming. The denarius, the empire's primary silver coin, was a symbol of stability, of power, of a promise. For nearly 2 centuries, its silver content remained remarkably consistent, around 90 to 95%. A merchant knew what he had. A soldier knew what he was paid. A citizen knew the value of his life's labor. It was a tangible representation of wealth, trust, and the boundless ambition of Rome. Life was hard, yes, but the currency, for a time, was a rock. But even rocks erode. An empire, however vast, however powerful, eventually runs into a wall. Expenses. Endless wars of expansion, maintaining legions across vast borders, funding lavish public works, keeping the populace happy with bread and circuses. It all costs money. A lot of money. The Roman state, much like modern governments, faced an eternal dilemma. How do you pay for everything without explicitly fleecing your citizens through unpopular taxes? The solution, brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its long-term consequences, was born out of desperation and political convenience. Debasement. They didn't call it inflation, of course. They called it making more money. See, when you need more coins but don't have enough silver from the mines or from conquered territories, what do? You start mixing. You melt down existing silver coins and add a little bit of cheaper base metal, copper, bronze, tin. A tiny bit at first, imperceptible to the naked eye, barely changing the weight. The emperor could then mint more coins from the same amount of silver, effectively creating wealth out of thin air. More coins meant more immediate cash for the legions, more for the hungry masses, more for the ambitious building projects. Problem solved, right? Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Under Emperor Nero, known more for fiddling than for fiscal prudence, the denarius's silver content dropped from about 90% to 80 to 85%. A subtle shift, perhaps. The average Roman probably didn't notice immediately. Prices might have crept up a little, but nothing dramatic. It seemed like a clever trick, a way to keep the imperial machinery grinding without overt economic pain. The government effectively paid its debts with money that was worth slightly less than it had been, without anyone having to vote on a tax hike. And this is where it gets interesting. because the initial effects are always benign, even positive, for those in power. More money circulates, allowing more spending, giving the illusion of prosperity. Debts are easier to pay off with these new, less valuable coins. The system, for a moment, breathes a sigh of relief. The emperor feels like a genius. The generals get their pay. The populace enjoys their games. Everyone wins, in the short term. But the temptation, once discovered, became irresistible. Subsequent emperors, facing their own financial pressures, followed suit. Domitian, Trajan, Hadrian, each nibbled away at the silver content. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, the denarius was down to around 75% silver. The empire was vast, the military stretched thin, diseases ravaged the population, and still, the demands for funding grew. The quiet theft of purchasing power was slowly, steadily, becoming the default monetary policy. Think this is just history? Think again. The mechanisms might be different. No literal melting pots and base metals today. But the underlying human impulses and systemic pressures are identical. The need for governments to fund ever-increasing expenditures without explicit taxation. The perceived ease of creating money to solve problems. The gradual erosion of a currency's integrity. It's all there. By the turbulent 3rd century, the Roman Empire was in crisis. Civil wars raged, barbarian invasions intensified, and the economic fabric began to unravel. And what was the solution? More debasement, of course. Emperor Septimius Severus plunged the silver content down to around 50%. Caracalla, his son, famous for his baths, made it closer to 40%. Every crisis, every war, every new demand on the state led to the same knee-jerk reaction. Print more money. Make it less valuable. The denarius, once a symbol of unshakable wealth, was rapidly becoming a shadow of its former self. Merchants began to lose trust, hoarding actual silver or goods instead of accepting the increasingly worthless coinage. The long-term consequences were beginning to bite, hard. And the people, the ordinary Romans who had diligently saved their silver coins, were about to discover a horrifying truth. Their wealth, through no fault of their own, was simply evaporating. The evaporation wasn't just a slow, quiet fade. Oh no, it escalated. Rapidly. By the mid-3rd century, things got truly absurd. The denarius, that once proud symbol of Roman might, was effectively dead. Replaced, or perhaps mocked, by a new coin, the Antoninianus. It was originally intended to be a double denarius, but contained less than double the silver. A brilliant piece of financial engineering, if your goal was to trick people into accepting less. And trick them they did, for a while. This was a classic bait and switch, packaged in bronze. The state was literally shortchanging its citizens and, with each subsequent emperor, accelerating the pace of this quiet theft. But the desperate measures continued. Emperor after emperor, facing endless wars on multiple fronts, devastating civil strife that tore the empire apart from within, and a populace demanding its bread and circuses, which, by the way, included massive distributions of free grain and gladiatorial games that cost a fortune, found themselves trapped. Trapped in a vicious cycle, needing more money, debasing the currency further, seeing prices skyrocket, needing even more money to keep the lights on. The Antoninianus, within decades, went from having some silver to being a mere bronze disc with a thin silver wash. Sometimes so thin, you could literally wipe it off with your thumb, revealing the base metal underneath. Imagine someone handing you a coin, and you immediately try to rub the silver off to see if you're being duped. That was daily life for millions. The market, unforgiving and brutally honest, was sending a clear message. This isn't real money. This is garbage. The concept of a fixed price vanished into the dust of the forum. Merchants, once they realized they were being paid in literal garbage, responded exactly as you would expect. They started demanding more coins for the same goods. If yesterday a loaf of bread cost 1 Antoninianus, today it might cost 2, tomorrow 5, next week 10. This wasn't just inflation, this was hyperinflation, a monetary plague that ravaged the empire from within, stripping away savings and stability faster than any barbarian horde. Farmers, seeing their hard-earned coins instantly lose value, simply stopped bringing their surplus to market or demanded payment in actual goods: wheat for oil, shoes for tools. Bartering, a relic of a pre-monetary age, made a grim, desperate comeback. Trust, the invisible glue of any functioning economy, utterly disintegrated. And what did the mighty Roman state do? What do all states do when their monetary policy fails spectacularly? They blame the merchants. They blame the greedy. They implement price controls, believing they can legislate away the laws of economics. Emperor Diocletian, a man of formidable will and an uncanny ability to reorganize an entire empire, attempted to fix everything with his infamous Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD. This wasn't a suggestion, it was law, backed by the death penalty. You charge too much for a tunic? Off with your head. You don't want to sell your grain at the decreed price? Expect to meet the executioner. Talk about an iron fist. Spoiler alert, again, it didn't work. Surprise, surprise. The markets, those inconvenient, stubborn forces of supply and demand, refused to obey imperial edicts, even under penalty of death. Instead of lowering prices, merchants simply withdrew goods from sale, hoarding them or selling them secretly at even higher prices. Black markets flourished, where prices were often higher than before the edict because of the added risk. Goods became scarce. Trade ground to a halt. People starved, not because there wasn't food, but because the government had effectively made it illegal to sell it at a market-clearing price. The edict, designed to restore order, only plunged the economy deeper into chaos, highlighting the sheer futility of commanding economic reality to bend to political will. This isn't just a dry historical anecdote about Roman mismanagement. This is a chilling blueprint, a pattern. When trust in the currency evaporates, when the state tries to paper over its fiscal irresponsibility by creating worthless money, the consequences are always the same. Wealth held in that currency, the savings of a lifetime, becomes a cruel mirage, vanishing before your very eyes. Imagine saving for decades, perhaps burying a stash of coins for your children in the hope of securing their future, only for them to dig it up and find it's not enough to buy a single meal. That was the crushing reality for countless Romans. The middle class, the bedrock of any stable society, was systematically destroyed. Their accumulated wealth, their stability, their very hopes for the future were simply confiscated through the printing press, or rather, the debasing forge. The psychological impact of this betrayal was immense, eroding faith not just in money, but in the entire system, the entire empire. The emperors, desperate for solutions, tried everything. Diocletian, in another grand attempt, tried to reform the currency by issuing new, supposedly stable gold and silver coins, backed by strict weight and purity standards. He thought a return to sound money would fix everything. But how do you introduce sound money when the state itself is fundamentally unsound, riddled with debt and an insatiable need for funds? How do you restore trust when you've spent centuries systematically destroying it? The new gold aureus and silver argentius immediately commanded a massive premium over the debased bronze garbage still flooding the markets. People hoarded the good money, spent the bad money. Gresham's law in full destructive swing. The state continued to operate with its worthless bronze, unable to pay its soldiers or feed its bureaucracy with anything of real value. The Roman government was essentially bankrupt, functionally printing monopoly money while its citizens clung to anything real. The Roman monetary system didn't just collapse, it imploded. It ceased to function as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, or a store of value. It became a joke, a symbol of the empire's terminal decline. It's hard to build roads, fund armies, or even keep the basic machinery of civilization running when your entire economic foundation is built on a rapidly decaying illusion. The once mighty legions, often paid in these increasingly worthless coins, became disloyal, resorting to plunder or switching allegiances to whoever could offer them something tangible. The intricate web of trade that bound the empire together unraveled, giving way to localized subsistence economies. Each region, each city, often each family, was forced to fend for itself, isolated and vulnerable, in a world where the future was an ever-shrinking horizon. The vast infrastructure of Rome, its intricate tax system, its bureaucratic might, all rendered ineffective by a currency that no one trusted. The empire wasn't conquered by barbarians on day one. It was eroded from the inside out, starting with the very coin in your pocket. This wasn't an external enemy that brought Rome to its knees. This was self-inflicted financial wounds, festering over centuries, ultimately poisoning the very arteries of the empire. The endless demand for funds, the political unwillingness to tax transparently, the convenient lie of debasement, these were the silent assassins of Roman prosperity. Your Roman ancestor, the one who worked hard, saved diligently, and believed in the stability of the empire, would have watched in horror as their lifelong efforts vanished into thin air, leaving them destitute, bewildered, and profoundly betrayed. Their savings didn't just disappear. They were systematically sacrificed on the altar of imperial expediency, a chilling premonition of what happens when the math of unsustainable spending meets the reality of economic law. A hard lesson, you'd think, one that humanity would learn. But history, like a persistent echo, rarely bothers with originality, content instead to repeat its most devastating performances. The stage is merely reset, the actors wear different clothes, but the script? The script remains eerily, terrifyingly similar. The fall of Rome, as we now understand, wasn't a singular event. It was a centuries-long process of decay, driven by a cocktail of external pressures and internal rot. But the rot began, demonstrably, undeniably, with the systematic destruction of its currency. The imperial printing press, metaphorically speaking, became the most destructive weapon against the empire's own citizens, gutting their wealth, destroying their trust, and ultimately dismantling the very economic engine that powered Roman might. The middle class vanished, replaced by a stark divide between the super-rich, who owned land and real assets, and the impoverished masses. The grand lesson, etched in the dust of history, is that when a government consistently debases its currency to fund its ambitions, it ultimately debases its entire society. The math, as always, proved inevitable. Enough of ancient history, you say? You think this can't happen now? You're living it. The stage is set, the actors are in place, and the script, rewritten with modern terminology and sophisticated financial instruments, is eerily similar. Forget literal silver content. Today, our debasement comes in the form of digits on a screen, created out of thin air by central banks, and an astronomical, utterly unsustainable national debt. Look across the Atlantic. The United States, the global economic hegemon, carries a national debt north of $34 trillion. 34 trillion. Say it out loud. That number isn't just large, it's a gravitational black hole. For context, it's more than the entire economic output of China. It's growing by billions every single day. Who holds this debt? A lot of it is held internally, by government accounts, by individuals, and significantly, by the Federal Reserve itself. And how do you fund such an insatiable appetite for spending without raising taxes to politically suicidal levels or slashing benefits that an aging population demands? You debase, you print, you pump. The Federal Reserve, our modern-day imperial mint, engaged in what they politely call quantitative easing for years. This wasn't just a fancy term for tweaking interest rates. It was a program of buying trillions of dollars in government bonds and other assets. Effectively, they conjured money into existence, injecting it directly into the financial system. For decades, the myth was that this only inflated asset prices, stocks, real estate, but wouldn't spill into consumer prices. Spoiler alert, it did. And it is. The inflation you've experienced over the last few years isn't a temporary blip. It's the lagging indicator of years of monetary debasement. Your dollar, once a stalwart, has been steadily losing its purchasing power. That $100 bill in your wallet today buys significantly less than it did 5 years ago, and dramatically less than it did 10 or 20 years ago. This isn't just prices rising. It's the invisible, insidious theft of your savings, happening in plain sight. Every dollar you hold, every dollar in your bank account, Every dollar earmarked for your retirement is being systematically diluted, diminished, drained of its value. It's a hidden tax, levied not by the IRS, but by the very custodians of the currency. Now, why 2026? Because the math, as the title provocatively states, is becoming undeniable, accelerating towards a critical inflection point. We're not just talking about the compounding interest on that $34 trillion debt, which alone now consumes a staggering portion of the national budget, diverting funds from productive investment. We're talking about demographics. The aging baby boomer generation is moving into retirement en masse, drawing on Social Security and Medicare benefits that are already under immense strain. Fewer working-age people are supporting more retirees. The only political answer, the path of least resistance, will be to print more, to debase more, to borrow more. Because no politician wants to be the one to tell millions of seniors their benefits are being cut. But the domestic pressures aren't the only forces at play. For decades, the US dollar has reigned supreme as the world's reserve currency. This status granted America immense power, allowing it to borrow cheaply and effectively export its inflation. But the world is changing. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now expanded, are actively seeking alternatives. Saudi Arabia, once a steadfast ally, is increasingly open to trading oil in currencies other than the dollar. Every major geopolitical tremor, every sanction, pushes more countries towards de-dollarization. If global confidence in the dollar begins to waver, if nations decide they don't want to hold vast reserves of a currency that's being perpetually debased, the domestic purchasing power of that dollar will plummet like a stone. The external pressure on the Roman denarius, from barbarian invasions and trade disruption, finds its modern echo in the shifting sands of global finance. So, your savings won't disappear in a puff of smoke. They won't be stolen by a hacker. They'll be eroded, like the Roman denarius, until their purchasing power is a shadow of its former self. That nest egg, diligently built over decades, might still show a numerical value in your bank account, but what that number buys will have diminished to a fraction of its perceived worth. The diligent saver, the middle-class family playing by the rules, will once again be the biggest loser. The math of unsustainable debt, demographic reality, and political cowardice is converging. 2026 isn't a hard deadline for a single event. It's the point where these trends, already well underway, become undeniably acute, accelerating the erosion to a pace that can no longer be ignored by anyone. What, then, is the astute observer to do? You can't fight the tide of history, but you can learn to navigate it. The answer, as it often is, lies in history itself. When the Roman denarius failed, people fled into real assets: land, gold, silver, tangible goods, productive enterprises. When modern currencies are debased, the smart money does the same. This means moving beyond the traditional wisdom of simply saving cash. It means understanding that cash is a claim on future goods and services, and if that claim is systematically undermined, your savings are fundamentally at risk. This isn't financial advice, of course. That's for your paid professional. This is a cold, hard look at historical patterns and present-day realities. It's about recognizing the game, understanding the players, and seeing the inevitable conclusion the math has already written. Your savings won't disappear because of a sudden collapse, but because of a gradual, relentless, and accelerating erosion of their value, orchestrated by forces beyond your immediate control, yet entirely predictable. The betrayal of the Roman citizen, watching their inherited wealth turn to dust, is a stark warning across 2 millennia. The question isn't if it will happen, but how quickly you adapt to the inescapable math. If this video gave you value, hit like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who appreciates this kind of content.